Charles Prescott stood in the elegantly furnished sitting room of his mother's house. It was another Monday morning, a time when he should have been at his own home, but his mother wouldn't hear of it. After dinner the previous night, he had stayed over, as she insisted. Now, he was taking one last glance in the mirror. His chiseled features seemed carved from the same stone as the grand houses that surrounded him. "Charles, darling, you should wear the navy blue suit for the meeting today. It makes you look more mature, rather than this one." His mother's voice cut through the air as she strode into his room, a cup of coffee in hand. Charles closed his eyes, tilting his head upward. "Mom, I feel like..." "Don't forget to tie your tie properly." "I can't have you looking like some sort of bohemian," she interrupted, her eyes narrowing as she scrutinized his appearance. With an exasperated sigh, Charles adjusted his tie for what felt like the 100th time that morning. Seeing that her gaze was still fixed on him, he walked to the wardrobe and selected a navy suit. He dressed quickly, not wanting to be late. As he stepped out of his room, his mother was waiting by the door. "Don't forget the speech I prepared for you. Once you tell them all that, you'll have them won over. I'll be there before the meeting starts." "But Mom, shouldn't I write it myself? If I express how I truly feel about leading the company forward, they'd be more inclined to support me," Charles suggested. Victoria Prescott sipped her coffee, her expression souring as the beverage had grown cold, much like her smile. "What have I told you about these things? Just trust me, Charles. Do as I say." She placed a hand on his shoulder. Charles knew exactly what she meant. She wanted him to follow her wishes, as always. Her words carried a subtle threat. "Okay, Mom. I need to sort out the packages for the orphanage first, then I'll head to work." He kissed her cheek before leaving the room and the house. Stepping out into the crisp morning air, Charles found his driver, Jenkins, waiting by the car. "Good morning, sir." "Morning, Jenkins." "Take me to the orphanage, please," Charles responded, settling into the back seat. As they drove through the city, his mind drifted to the meeting ahead. His mother had prepared an extensive speech, and he wasn't looking forward to delivering it. But he knew better than to disobey her. The 20-minute drive ended as they arrived at the orphanage, a pair of large apartments surrounded by a small garden. A woman was already waiting outside, smiling warmly. "Good morning, Sister Margaret."
"Ah,
"Charles, dear boy. Thank you for coming. We're so grateful for your family's support," she said, shaking his hand. Charles smiled and followed her inside, where the sound of children's chatter filled the air. He spent the next hour helping to sort packages of food and clothing he had sent earlier, chatting with the kids and listening to their stories. "Sir, your mother," Jenkins whispered, approaching Charles, who was reading a book to the children and handing him his phone. Charles jumped to his feet, realizing he was on the brink of being late for his meeting. As he prepared to leave, Sister Margaret handed him a small box. "For your mother, Charles. A little something from the children." Touched by the gesture, Charles accepted the box. "Thank you, sister. I'll make sure she gets it." With a final wave to everyone, he hurried back to the car. Jenkins sped off, knowing they had to beat the clock. Upon arriving at the office, Charles took a deep breath and headed to the conference room. His secretary was waiting for him with the speech his mother had prepared. He fumbled with the papers, trying to quickly review them. "Good morning, everyone," he began, striving to sound confident as he entered the room. "I'm here today to talk about Green Tech Incorporated. Yes, our solar panels harness the power of the sun and reduce carbon emissions by 50%. He paused, trying to recall the exact figures. Glancing at his notes, his eyes scanned the page without truly focusing. "And our wind turbines generate electricity at a rate of 2.5 megawatts. The clients exchanged unimpressed looks, one raising an eyebrow, another scribbling notes. Charles tried to regain his composure, but his words became increasingly jumbled. "Our energy storage systems use advanced battery technology to optimize energy efficiency and reduce waste." He trailed off, struggling to remember the key points. The client's skepticism grew, and Charles could feel their eyes, and most importantly, his mother's, on him. He knew he was floundering but couldn't find his footing. "Let me start again," he said, taking a deep breath. "I'm sorry, I'll just get to it." He avoided his mother's gaze, knowing from the start that relying on her script was a mistake. Despite all his practice, he still felt uneasy. "I know we're not just selling solar panels and wind turbines," Charles began, his voice steady. "We're offering a chance to make a real difference, a chance to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and create a more sustainable future. At Green Tech Incorporated, our responsibility goes beyond providing renewable energy solutions. We're committed to making a positive impact on the communities we serve." Charles pointed to the screen behind him, highlighting the company's initiatives. "For instance, our Green Schools program has provided educational resources and workshops to teach children about renewable energy and sustainability. We've also partnered with local organizations to develop community gardens and green spaces, giving people access to fresh produce and promoting environmental stewardship." He continued, "We're also committed to transparency and accountability in everything we do," emphasizing his point. "We publish annual sustainability reports detailing our progress and impact. Additionally, we have an independent advisory board that ensures our practices align with our values and mission." Charles paused, making eye contact with each client in the room. "We believe that business can be a force for good, and we're dedicated to leading by example." The clients listened closely, their initial skepticism giving way to interest. "I believe in what we do," Charles said, his conviction clear. "And I know that together, we can make a real difference." The room fell silent for a moment before erupting into applause. The clients smiled, nodding in approval. "Thank you, Charles," one of them finally spoke, glancing at his partners for confirmation. "That was a great pitch. We can see you're passionate about what your company does." Another executive chimed in, "I have to admit, I was skeptical at first, but you've really convinced me of your company's values. Can you tell us more about your work?" Charles smiled, relieved that the pitch had gone well. "Of course. Our company, Green Tech Incorporated, specializes in sustainable energy solutions. We design and implement renewable energy systems for businesses and homes, helping them reduce their carbon footprint and save on energy costs." One of the executives leaned forward, intrigued. "That sounds impressive. Can you give us some examples of your work?" Charles nodded. "We've worked with several major companies to install solar panels and wind turbines, reducing their energy costs by up to 50%. We've also helped homeowners switch to renewable energy sources, cutting their reliance on fossil fuels." The executives took notes, asking follow-up questions. After a few minutes of discussion, one of them said, "Thank you. I think we've found ourselves a partner." As Charles left the meeting room, feeling relieved, his mother quickly followed, looking less than pleased. "Charles, what was that?" she demanded, closing the door behind her. "You didn't follow the plan at all." Charles looked at his mother, trying to remain calm. "Mom, I know I didn't stick to the script, but I felt like I needed to speak from the heart." She cut him off. "Speak from the heart? This is business, Charles, not some feel-good charity event. You need to stick to the plan and make a strong impression." "But Mom, I think I did make a good impression. The clients responded well to my passion," he countered. "Passion?" she scoffed. "This isn't about passion, Charles. It's about making deals and growing the company. You need to focus on the bottom line, not your feelings," she said, pacing. Without a word, Charles walked past his mother and opened the door. "I need some air." "Charles, what are you doing? You can't just leave in the middle of the day," his mother protested, but he was already determined to get away from her. As he emerged from the building, his driver, Jenkins, was waiting by the car, looking concerned. "Sir, shall I drive you somewhere?" he asked. Charles shook his head. "No, Jenkins. I need some time alone. I'll drive myself. I'll be fine." Despite his assurance, Jenkins hesitated, but Charles got into his car and drove away from the building, wanting to distance himself from everything. He drove aimlessly, trying to clear his head, until he found himself in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. He parked his car in a safe spot and got out, wandering the streets as he processed his emotions. Eventually, his feet led him to a small restaurant nestled between skyscrapers. The exterior was unremarkable, but something about it drew him inside. As Charles stepped through the door, a bell chimed, breaking the silence. His eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, and he noticed a young woman wiping down tables. Her dark hair was tied back in a ponytail, and a warm smile spread across her face as she looked up and met his gaze. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. "Hi there," she greeted, dropping the cloth on the table and breaking the spell. "Welcome to, well, we don't have a name yet, actually." She laughed, and Charles's heart skipped a beat. "But we're getting there. We're not open yet, but you should come back in a week for our grand opening." As he turned to leave, Charles caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window, a young man who wanted more out of life. He took a deep breath, savoring the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the warmth of the restaurant. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. "But if you don't mind, can I get something to drink?" he asked. "We're still experimenting with our menu, but I can whip up something special," she replied. Charles nodded eagerly and took a seat at the counter, watching her work. She handed him a glass filled with a velvety liquid a moment later. "Try this. It's one of our signature drinks, we call it the Midnight Sky." As he took a sip, he was surprised by the flavors dancing on his tongue, a perfect balance between sweet and savory. "This is incredible," he said, smiling at her as he finished the drink. Her eyes crinkled at the corners as she smiled back. "I'm glad you like it," Charles said, his voice warm but slightly hesitant. "I'm sorry, I know I'm not in the right place to ask, but what brought you here?" "The place looks uninhabited from the outside." Charles hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal to someone he had just met. "It's just been a rough day for me. My mother, she's constantly on my back." The young woman chuckled, placing her hands on the counter. "Aren't they all? What did she do this time?" Charles sighed, nodding slowly. "She can't seem to let me be. She wants to be involved in everything I do, and she pushes her decisions onto me, even when I'm against them." "Even when you don't want her input," the woman finished for him. "Sounds like she just doesn't want to admit that you've grown up." "Maybe," Charles replied, watching her as she worked. Despite the sweat on her forehead from the exertion, her beauty wasn't diminished. "I didn't catch your name earlier." "I'm Charles." She smiled, moving away from the counter. "Sophia." Charles glanced at his watch and was shocked at how much time had passed. "How have I spent so much time here? Is it your beauty that kept me, or the drink?" Sophia shot him a look, making him laugh. "Don't patronize me, Charles. It's most likely the drink." Charles hesitated, not wanting the moment to end. "Can I see you again?" Sophia raised an eyebrow, giving him a funny look. "I don't know. I'm pretty busy with the restaurant." He nodded, trying to be understanding. "My birthday party is coming up, and I'd love for you to be there. It would mean a lot to me." Sophia laughed, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I don't know, I might be busy for a while. We're still getting everything off the ground here." Charles nodded, though he was disappointed. "I get it, but can we at least exchange contacts? I'd love to stay in touch." He pulled out his phone. "Okay, sure, but no promises," she said, taking his number. "No promises," Charles echoed with a grin. "I just want to make sure I can find you again." Sophia smiled as they exchanged numbers, and Charles felt triumphant. "I guess we'll be seeing each other again."
Bye.
For now. Charles left the restaurant quickly, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. A few weeks later, as his birthday approached, he finally mentioned Sophia to his mother during dinner. "Charles, what are you thinking?" "A Prescott does not associate with service industry workers," his mother said, dropping her spoon as she looked at him with disapproval. Charles shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, I just met her, and..." It doesn't matter, his mother interrupted. You must maintain a certain social standing, Charles. What would it look like for the company if you were dating a waitress? He sighed dramatically, pushing his food around on his plate. Please, Mom, can you just give her a chance? She's not like what you think. Victoria stared at her only son, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. I've arranged a dinner for this weekend. It was supposed to be just the two of us, but now that you've told me this, bring her. What's her name? Sophia, Charles replied, a mix of surprise and gratitude in his voice. Thank you, Mom. She'll be here. He rose to his feet, excited by his mother's apparent change of heart. I've got to get going now, I have a trip tomorrow. As soon as he was out of his mother's mansion, Charles texted Sophia about the dinner. He wanted to call, but she had told him multiple times not to disturb her while she was working. Sophia received the text during her shift. It wasn't what she had planned for the weekend, but it didn't hurt to go. The weekend came quickly, and when Sophia arrived at the Prescott estate, she was taken aback by the grandeur of the entrance. As she stepped out of the cab, she was struck by the opulence of the decor. A wave of shock and embarrassment washed over her as she looked down at her simple outfit. When she stepped inside, the extravagance of the mansion and the finely tailored staff overwhelmed her. Charles, why didn't you warn me? She whispered to him as he met her at the entrance. I feel so out of place. Charles looked taken aback by her reaction. I'm sorry, Sophia. You look beautiful, regardless. Don't flatter me, she retorted, playfully hitting his arm. I'm telling you, I feel out of place. He leaned closer, smiling. I'm glad I didn't tell you. You might not have given me your number. Sophia was about to reply when a slow clap interrupted her. She turned to see a stunning woman in a long black gown approaching them. I would have left you two outside, but dinner is about to start, the woman said, her voice commanding yet elegant. Sophia, darling, come. Sophia exchanged a look with Charles, who nudged her toward the woman. That's my mother, Victoria Prescott. Sophia and Victoria walked into the mansion together, and Sophia tried her best not to gape at the luxurious surroundings. When they reached the dining room, which to Sophia seemed bigger than her entire restaurant, the maids were lined up at the ends of the room. Charles pulled out a chair for her, making her smile as she sat down. He took a seat beside her, opposite his mother, who couldn't stop scrutinizing them. Just as they were about to start eating, Charles's phone rang. I'm sorry, but there's something I need to take care of. I'll be back before you know it, he said, squeezing Sophia's hand softly before leaving the table. Well, dinner has to go on. He'll join us soon, so eat, Victoria gestured to Sophia, who nervously began to eat. Tell me, Rose, what inspired your interesting choice of attire? Victoria asked, her tone sharp. Sophia looked up, smiling politely. It's Sophia, ma'am. I just thought it was a nice dress. Victoria smiled sweetly. Well, it's certainly eye-catching. And your profession, tell me, what's it like being a waitress? Sophia maintained her composure. It's a lot of experience, ma'am. I get to interact with different people every day, and it's fun for me. Sometimes the restaurant gets busy, which means everyone has to be on their toes. Victoria raised an eyebrow, intrigued but skeptical. You talk about it as if it's a good thing. Sophia's eyes drifted momentarily, contemplating her response. To me, it's better than doing nothing. Victoria nodded slightly, then shifted the topic. Speaking of which, Charles's birthday ball is going to be the event of the season. The guest list is a veritable who's who of society, rivaling even the Grammys. It will be a night to remember, royalty, celebrities, business moguls, all attending. Glamour and sophistication like you've never experienced, I'm sure. Sophia's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the high-profile event, a twinge of hesitation creeping in. Victoria's words made her feel even more out of place. Oh, I'm sure it will be, Sophia replied, trying to sound nonchalant despite her growing doubts. As the evening drew to a close, Charles walked Sophia out, thanking her for coming. I'm sorry if my mother was a bit much, he whispered, holding her hands. Sophia smiled weakly. I had a good time, but the only thing missing was you. You were gone for most of the dinner. I'm really sorry, he said, pulling her into a hug. The next day, Sophia received a dress along with a note from Victoria. Dear Sophia, I thought this dress would be perfect for Charles's birthday ball. Black tie events can be so intimidating, I wanted to help. Best, Victoria. Sophia touched the hem of the fabric, noting its expensive quality. What gladdened her heart more was the kind gesture from Victoria. After the dinner, she had been slightly convinced that Victoria didn't really like her, but this gift suggested otherwise. On the day of the event, Sophia wore the elegant black dress, clearly made of luxurious fabric that hugged her curves in all the right places. The dress fell just above her knees, with a modest neckline. She paired it with silver heels, a gift from Charles, and a simple necklace and stud earrings he had also given her. She pulled her hair back into a low ponytail, feeling confident and beautiful as she looked in the mirror. Arriving at the mansion, Sophia was amazed by how beautifully decorated it was. As she reached the door, a team of security guards and event staff were checking invitations and IDs. Sophia approached them confidently, expecting to be let in without any issues. Good evening, welcome to the event, one of the staff members greeted her, eyeing her up and down. May I see your invitation, please? She hesitated, realizing she didn't have an invitation. I'm a guest of Charles, she said. He invited me personally. The staff member raised an eyebrow. I apologize, but I need to see your invitation or confirmation email to let you in. Just then, a woman with an iPad and a stern expression approached them. I'm the event coordinator, she introduced herself, scanning Sophia's face with the iPad. I'm afraid this woman isn't on the guest list. The event coordinator turned to Sophia. I'm sorry, but you're not allowed inside. You'll have to leave. Sophia stepped away from the entrance and pulled out her phone. She dialed Charles's number, hoping he would answer and clear up the misunderstanding, but the phone rang and rang with no answer. She tried again, thinking he might be busy, but again, there was no response. Frustrated, she sent him a text, Hey, it's Sophia. I'm outside. They won't let me in. What's going on? But there was no response. Inside, Charles's eyes scanned the room, searching for Sophia, who had informed him earlier that she was on her way. As the minutes passed, he grew distracted, wondering where she was. Assuming she was mingling with the guests, he made his way through the crowd but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Finally, he checked his phone and saw the missed calls and text from Sophia. His heart sank as he quickly dialed her number. Sophia, where are you? He asked, alarmed. I'm outside, she answered sadly. I wasn't allowed in. My name wasn't on the list. Charles's face fell as he realized the mistake. He quickly apologized and rushed to the entrance, where he found Sophia looking stunning in the dress his mother had sent her. As he escorted her into the celebration, he couldn't help but notice the curious glances from the other guests. I'm so sorry. There must have been some kind of mix-up. Please forgive me, he pleaded. Sophia glared at him for a moment before walking over to the champagne table and grabbing a glass. For a moment, I contemplated going home and forgetting about everything. Thank your stars you came on time. Thank you for not leaving, Charles replied, relieved. Charles was about to say more when a man approached, informing him that his attention was needed elsewhere. I'm sorry, I'll be back in a jiffy. Just have fun, he said before disappearing into the crowd. At first, Sophia tried to make the best of the night, but as the evening wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. People were giving her strange looks, and an unsettling sense of unease began to creep in. Excuse me, can you refill my drink? A woman tapped her from behind, her tone impatient. The others seem busy, please be quick. Sophia glanced over her shoulder, unsure if the woman was talking to her. I'm sorry, but you're mistaken. I'm not a maid. The woman laughed dismissively. Are you being serious? It was then that Sophia realized with a sinking heart that the dress she was wearing was identical to the uniforms of the house staff. She was being mistaken for a servant, and the guests were finding it hilarious. "I'm not a maid," she repeated, more to herself than to the woman. "I'm a guest." The woman's expression turned scornful. "Oh, sorry. I must have mistaken you for one of the help." Sophia felt a wave of embarrassment and fury. She needed to find Charles and get out of there as soon as possible. Glancing around, she spotted the restroom and made her way towards it, eager to avoid any more mocking glances. Luckily, the restroom was empty when she entered. She locked herself in one of the stalls, desperate to be alone. But soon after, the door opened, and loud voices filled the room. "Can you believe that dress?" one of the women said, giggling as she turned on the tap. "It's like she's trying to be a servant or something." "I know, right?" the other replied, laughing. "I saw her trying to mingle with the guests, and I was like, girl, you're not fooling anyone." Sophia's heart sank. She couldn't believe she had been so blind to Victoria's plan. What she had taken as a kind gesture now felt like a cruel trick. As soon as the women left, she quickly exited the stall, trying to hold back tears. She needed to find Charles, to make him understand what was happening. But as she made her way back to the party, she saw him laughing and chatting with his friends, completely oblivious to her distress. A surge of anger and hurt overwhelmed her. How could he be so clueless? Didn't he care that his mother was humiliating her like this? Taking a deep breath, Sophia tried to calm down. She approached Charles, determined to talk to him, but before she could reach him, Victoria intercepted her, spreading her arms in a mock embrace. "I hope you know where you belong now," Victoria whispered in Sophia's ear before she could pull away from the hug. In that moment, Sophia knew she had to get out of there before things got any worse. As she turned to leave, a guest intentionally poured their drink on her. "Oops. Look at the help now. Why don't you go clean it up?" That was the last straw. Sophia closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She pushed through the crowd that was beginning to form, desperate to escape, but was met with a wall of paparazzi. "Who are you?" one of them asked, cameras snapping furiously. "I'm no one," Sophia muttered, trying to shield her face. "Just leave me alone." But they continued to snap photos of her. Meanwhile, Charles, deep in discussion with a potential client, heard gasps from the crowd. Looking over, he saw Sophia struggling to make her way to the entrance, her clothes stained, and paparazzi swarming around her. "Excuse me," Charles interrupted the man he was talking to and hurried towards her. But by the time he reached the entrance, Sophia was already stepping into a taxi. "Sophia, wait," he called out, but the taxi door closed, and it drove away. Charles stood there, helpless and ashamed. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried again and again, but she wasn't answering. He knew he had to talk to her, to explain what had happened and apologize for his mother's actions. But for now, she was gone, leaving him alone outside his own party. Weeks passed, and Charles's distraction at work grew worse by the day. His mother, Victoria, noticed the change in him and eventually confronted him. "Charles, what's going on with you? You're not focused on the company at all. We can't afford to lose our edge, not now when we're on the verge of being taken over." Charles sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know, Mother. I'll try to focus." But he couldn't stop thinking about Sophia. He tried to immerse himself in work, but his thoughts kept drifting back to her. He wondered if she was okay, if she had forgiven him. As the days turned into weeks, Charles became increasingly withdrawn. He stopped attending meetings, stopped answering calls, and rarely left his office. His mother grew concerned, but Charles couldn't explain what was wrong, he didn't fully understand it himself. One evening, he found himself standing in front of the restaurant where they first met, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. But she wasn't there. The next day, he drove to her apartment, hoping to see her, but she wasn't there either. Feeling desperate, Charles decided to wait for her outside her apartment. He arrived in the morning and sat in his car, watching the entrance. As the hours passed, he began to feel like he was hallucinating. But then, he saw her. His heart skipped a beat, wondering if he was dreaming. But then, Sophia saw him too, and she smiled. "Sophia, what are you doing here?" Charles asked as he stepped out of the car, feeling as though he were in a trance. Sophia stood by the window, looking surprised. "I could ask you the same thing." I don't know. "I just needed to see you," Charles stammered, his voice raw with emotion. Sophia nodded and motioned for him to come inside. Charles followed her into the apartment, feeling like he was walking into a dream. The room was cozy, decorated with various hand-drawn characters, reflecting Sophia's artistic spirit. She led him to the couch, and they sat down together, the silence heavy between them. "I've missed you," Charles began, his voice trembling with sincerity. Sophia took his hand gently. "I've missed you too." They sat in silence for a moment, their hands entwined, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Finally, Sophia broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about us, Charles, about what happened at the party," she said, her voice soft but firm. Charles nodded, guilt gnawing at him. "I'm so sorry, Sophia. I didn't know what happened until later, when I heard someone had poured wine on you." Sophia squeezed his hand, her eyes full of empathy. "You didn't know, Charles, but it was hard for me. I felt so alone and humiliated out there." Charles's voice broke as he replied, "I'm sorry, Sophia. I should have known. I shouldn't have left you alone. Waking up every morning, knowing I couldn't reach you, has been pure torture." Sophia smiled gently, seeing the pain in his eyes and understanding how much it had cost him. "Let's go get dinner. What better way to celebrate this?" Charles let out a relieved laugh, pulling her into a tight embrace, holding her as if afraid she might slip away again. "Thank you for forgiving me." "Thank you." They held each other for a while, savoring the moment of reconciliation. After Sophia had freshened up, they decided to eat out. As they stepped out of the apartment, hand in hand, Charles noticed a black limousine parked behind his car. His steps slowed, alerting Sophia, who followed his gaze. "What is my mother doing here?" he mumbled to himself, squeezing Sophia's hand. Sophia's eyes widened as a chauffeur stepped out of the limo and approached them. "Miss Sophia, your grandfather requests your presence immediately." Charles's eyes narrowed as he positioned himself protectively in front of Sophia. "Who is your grandfather? What's going on?" Sophia looked puzzled but calm. "I don't know what this is about, but I have to go." "Come with me?" "Of course." "I wouldn't let you go alone," Charles replied, his tone resolute. As they entered the limo, Sophia's anxiety grew. "I've never seen my grandfather send a limo before, something must be wrong. I just hope he's all right. The last time he wasn't well, he didn't tell me." Charles took her hand, trying to reassure her. "We'll face whatever it is together." The limo pulled up to a large commercial building, the Green Tech Incorporated logo emblazoned on the side. "Wait, why are we here? This is your family's company, right?" Sophia asked as they got out, her confusion growing. Charles was equally puzzled but kept his composure as they glanced back at the chauffeur, who gestured for them to enter. They hurried into the building and took the elevator up. As they stepped out, they heard someone speaking in one of the offices. Charles knew exactly where it was and led Sophia there, still confused. Inside, a man with his back to them was addressing a room full of people about how things would be run differently. Suddenly, he turned towards them, smiling broadly.
Ah.
"There she is. Your new CEO has arrived," he announced, and the room erupted in applause. "Granddad?" Sophia stepped forward, relieved to see he was fine but confused by his statement. Her grandfather chuckled warmly. "Yes, my dear. I'm afraid I've kept my true identity and wealth hidden from you, but I've been grooming you for leadership all along." Charles's mind reeled as he tried to process the information. Sophia, the woman he loved, was now the CEO of Green Tech Incorporated. His mother had mentioned issues concerning the next leader, but he hadn't been in the right state of mind to pay attention. Sophia's grandfather continued, "I've had you working at one of my restaurants, with my security monitoring your progress. You've shown great potential, my darling, and now it's time for you to take the reins." Victoria's face turned pale, her eyes darting between Sophia and Charles. "This can't be," she whispered, her voice barely audible. George's expression hardened as he addressed Victoria, pulling her into the office with Charles and Sophia. "I know what happened at the birthday party, Victoria. Treating my beloved granddaughter like that was unforgivable." Victoria's eyes flickered with fear as she tried to defend herself. I can explain." "No, you can't," George cut her off sharply. "My initial intention was to sell the company off in pieces, leaving you and your son with scraps after paying off the board. But seeing how much my granddaughter loves Charles, and how much he loves her, I've changed my mind." Charles's eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean? What happened at the party?" Sophia took a deep breath, bracing herself. "Your mother humiliated me, Charles. She made me wear a uniform identical to the staff's, and people thought I was a servant. That's why that lady poured wine over me." Charles turned to his mother, disbelief and anger etched on his face. "Mom, is that true? Did you really do that to her? Why would you?" Victoria avoided his gaze, her silence confirming the truth. It was then that it all clicked for Charles. He remembered the strange looks people had given them when they arrived at the event, how his mother had kept him close after the incident on his birthday. "This will be the last time we have a conversation," Charles said coldly, stepping back from his mother, his heart heavy with disappointment. "I never thought you'd go as far as treating her so poorly," Charles said, his voice thick with disappointment. "You should have been better than this." George nodded approvingly. "I'm glad to see you're not like your mother, Charles. But I want to hear it from you, why should you still be a part of this company?" Charles took a deep breath, his resolve clear. "I've worked hard for this company, sir. I've always given 110%, striving to turn things around. I love this company, and I believe in its potential. I want to continue working here to make it succeed. I'm sorry for my mother's wrongdoing, but I can assure you, I'm nothing like her." George looked at him, impressed by his sincerity. "I like your spirit, Charles. But it's not up to me anymore. You should ask the new CEO." Charles nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He prepared himself for whatever decision Sophia might make. But then, Sophia smiled warmly, her eyes shining with affection. "No, I don't think you should just be an employee here." Charles's heart skipped a beat, unsure if he'd heard correctly. What do you mean?" "I think you'd be better at running it," Sophia said, her smile widening. Charles stared at her, disbelief washing over him. "Are you serious? Do you really mean that?" "Yes, I do," Sophia replied, her voice full of conviction. "You've proven yourself, Char. You have the heart and the skills to lead this company to greatness." Overwhelmed with emotion, Charles pulled her into a tight hug, breathing in her familiar scent. "Thank you, my love. Thank you." In the corner of the room, Victoria watched as her son and the girl she had tried to humiliate laughed and embraced each other. It was more humiliating than anything she had ever experienced. It was as if she didn't exist to them anymore. She stood there, frozen, until George invited them for a quick dinner to celebrate. As they left the room, Victoria crumbled, falling to her knees as tears streamed down her face. She wished desperately that she could turn back time. She had expected many things, but not for everything to turn out so badly for her. She began to notice the change when she went to her favorite social club for lunch. The maitre d' greeted her with a cold stare, and the usual table by the window was given to someone else. "I'm afraid we're fully booked today, Mrs. Prescott," the maitre d' said dismissively. Victoria was shocked. She had always been treated like royalty at this club. As she left, she saw her so-called friends whispering and pointing at her, quickly looking away when she noticed. A chill ran down her spine. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just her imagination, but as the days passed, things only got worse. She was no longer invited to exclusive events, and her phone calls went unanswered. Her bank account began to dwindle, and she realized that her money couldn't take her anywhere anymore. Victoria's world was crumbling around her, she had lost everything, her reputation, her friends, her status. And it was all because of her own cruel actions. She tried to reach out to Charles, but he refused to take her calls. He had disowned her, just like everyone else. And that hurt the most. If only she had been more sensible, more mature, she wouldn't have found herself in this mess. She never imagined that one day, everything she once had would slip away. Meanwhile, Sophia pushed her baby stroller through the quiet streets of the neighborhood, feeling a deep sense of contentment. Her life had taken a dramatic turn since meeting Charles, and she was grateful for every moment they shared. Their daughter, Esmeralda, was the light of their lives, and Sophia couldn't imagine a future without her. She breathed in deeply, savoring the sweet scent of blooming flowers and freshly baked bread wafting from the nearby cafes. Sophia reflected on her life and all the good things that had come since she met Charles. She remembered their first date, the picnic they had shared weeks after he began his role as CEO. She thought about the time he had held her hand while teaching her to ride a bicycle and the joy they felt on their wedding day. The wedding had come quickly, but she hadn't been nervous. She had everything she once thought she couldn't have. Her grandfather, always loving and doting, had done everything to make the day splendid for her. She couldn't have wished for anything more. And then, of course, there was Esmeralda, their beautiful daughter. Sophia's heart swelled with love as she thought about her little girl. As she rolled the stroller down the sidewalk, Sophia felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life she had built. She thought about how Charles supported her, encouraged her, and loved her for who she was. She thought about how Esmeralda brought them joy and laughter every day. Sophia's heart was full as she walked, the stroller gliding smoothly over the pavement. She felt like the luckiest person in the world and knew she would never take this life, this love, for granted. As she turned a corner, she spotted someone familiar. At first, it was just her eyes, but as Sophia moved closer, she realized she wasn't imagining things. It was Victoria. The older woman turned around, holding the hands of two young children, one on each side. When she saw Sophia, her eyes widened in surprise, quickly filling with tears. "Sophia, how are you?" Victoria asked, her voice trembling. Sophia smiled softly, taking in the sight of her mother-in-law. The vibrant woman she once knew had aged significantly. Her once smooth skin was now etched with deep lines, a testament to the years that had passed. "I'm doing fine. Who are these little beauties with you?" she asked, gesturing to the children. "Hi, darlings. How are you?" Sophia greeted warmly, though the children were too engrossed in the nearby park to notice her. "I'm sorry, Sophia," Victoria apologized suddenly, her voice filled with regret. Sophia's smile was gentle. "It's all right, Victoria. I hold no grudges against you. I'm sorry for everything that happened to you." Tears welled up in Victoria's eyes. "I was so blind, Sophia. I thought money and status were everything, but I've learned my lesson. Being kind to people is what truly matters." Sophia nodded, her expression kind. "I'm glad you've learned that. And I want to offer you something, the company. It's yours if you want it." Victoria shook her head firmly. "No, Sophia. I don't want it. I've realized that money isn't everything. I'm just grateful to have experienced this change." Sophia smiled warmly. "I know it's late, but I want to introduce you to someone." She gently uncovered the small bundle in the stroller. "This is my daughter, Esmeralda Victoria Prescott. Charles and I got married and had a beautiful child." Victoria's eyes widened as she repeated the name, her voice trembling with emotion. "Esmeralda. Victoria?" Sophia nodded, smiling. "Yes, so we can always remember you." A wave of emotion washed over Victoria. No one had ever named a child after her before. She had always been the one causing pain, but now this little girl, this beautiful, innocent child, carried her name. Tears streamed down Victoria's face as she gazed at Esmeralda, feeling a sense of pride and joy she had never known. With a trembling hand, Victoria gently touched Esmeralda's cheek. "Oh, my dear," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I am so honored. I don't deserve it, but I am so grateful." Sophia smiled and hugged Victoria tightly. You do deserve it, Victoria. You deserve all the love and joy in the world. As Victoria held Esmeralda in her arms, a sense of redemption washed over her. She knew she had been given a second chance, a chance to make things right, to be a good grandmother to this little girl, to be a good person. We want to go to the park. We want to go to the park, the little girls Victoria was holding chimed in unison, breaking the tender moment. Victoria smiled down at them, nodding. Not today, kids, but I promise we'll have fun anyway. She then turned back to Sophia, who was looking at her curiously. These little ones are from the orphanage where I volunteer, Victoria explained. I'm helping take care of them today. They don't have families, so I like to spend time with them and make them feel loved. Sophia's eyes softened with admiration. Oh, Victoria, that's amazing. I had no idea you were involved with an orphanage. How did you start? Victoria looked thoughtful. After everything happened, I realized I'd been given a second chance. I wanted to use it to make a difference in others' lives. These children deserve love and care, and I'm happy to be able to provide that for them. Sophia smiled warmly. You know, despite our past differences, I'd like to extend an olive branch. Would you like to come over for dinner sometime? Victoria was taken aback by the invitation. She hadn't expected Sophia to reach out, especially after everything that had happened. I don't know, Sophia, she said hesitantly. I'm not sure it's a good idea. Sophia nodded, understanding her hesitation. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I think it's time to put the past behind us. We're family, after all, and I'd like to get to know you better. And it's time for you and Charles to reconnect. Victoria was deeply touched by Sophia's words. She had never expected this level of kindness and grace from her estranged daughter-in-law. Okay, Victoria finally nodded. I'll come over for dinner. But just me, not the kids from the orphanage. Sophia's smile was warm and welcoming. Of course, just you. I'll make sure to cook something special. The evening of the dinner, Victoria stood outside Sophia and Charles's home, taking a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. She hadn't seen her son in years and wasn't sure what to expect. The door opened, and Sophia greeted her with a warm smile. Victoria, come on in. Victoria stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Charles. He looked older, more mature, but his eyes still held a hint of the pain she had caused him. Charles, she called out, not moving from the spot she was in. Mother, Charles replied, his voice steady but cautious. Victoria took a tentative step forward, her hands trembling. Charles, I don't know where to start. I'm so sorry for everything I did. I was wrong to treat you the way I did. Charles looked at her warily, but Sophia stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Charles, please hear her out. He nodded, and Victoria continued, her voice thick with emotion. I know I can never undo the pain I caused you, but I want you to know that I love you. I always have. And I'm proud of the man you've become. Charles's eyes searched hers for sincerity. She had done so much to hurt him, things that took him years to overcome. But now, here she was, genuinely seeking forgiveness. Slowly, he nodded. I love you too, Mother. A lump formed in Victoria's throat as Charles opened his arms to her. She stepped into them, holding him tightly, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. I'm so sorry, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Charles held her close, his own eyes wet with tears. I forgive you, Mother. I forgive you. As they embraced, Sophia smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. This was what she had hoped for, reconciliation between mother and son. After a few moments, Charles stepped back, smiling. Let's go sit down. We have a lot to catch up on. Victoria nodded, smiling through her tears. The three of them sat down in the living room, talking and laughing together as if no time had passed. As the evening wore on, Victoria felt a sense of joy she hadn't felt in years. She had her son back, and she was deeply grateful. Charles held his wife's hand, sharing a tender glance with her. Of all the blessings in his life, she was the most precious. "Thank you," he mouthed to her, causing Sophia to smile, her heart light as if she were a girl in love all over again.